Okay, I am back again for Odinmade Hero. It is day 55 we're about to kick off here, and it's hard to believe that we started on day 26 on the stream. Time just flies by for me these days more and more. And it's kind of a stereotype. Every single parent in my life that has like grown-up children, specifically my parents, and my wife's parents, talk about how fast it goes once you have kids and then they start growing and all of this. And at the same time, when you're in the trenches and you're trying to raise really young children, it can be pretty tough. So it's a weird sort of time dilation. When you're going through it, it doesn't feel like time is racing, and then when you like actually step back from the doing it sort of thing, all of a sudden, kind of like working on this series, like it's hard to believe that I started doing Handmade Hero and Zig going on a year ago, and I knew absolutely nothing, and it still feels like I know nothing sometimes, but certainly I've picked up on quite a bit. And so it's just it's this thing that I keep coming back to, where it really is more about that journey than the end goal. It's about experiencing all of these aha moments and having all these realizations that make it fun. It's not when we ultimately have a finished game. It's like being satisfied and knowing that it was worth it to do the thing. I don't know. It's hard to articulate these things sometimes. But anyway, so yesterday kind of finished rather on a bummer note. We were trying to kind of rush through so I could go and celebrate Halloween with my family downtown in the city where we live. And to that point, I hope anybody who is into that sort of thing, I hope you had a good Halloween yesterday. I hope you got up to something fun and spooky. But we just walked around and downtown, and there was tons of other families with their kids. And I don't know who organized all this. I guess the city organized it, maybe. I really don't know. I just heard it through somebody told us that it was going on, and it just it seemed like the whole city showed up. And so it was a nice kind of moment of people coming together and just having fun during a rather high stress time with everything going on right now. So but yeah, we wrapped up. I was rushing, and I kind of knew that I was going to make a mistake, and it was disappointing to wrap up that stream in a broken state. But I kind of got a clue when, and I think I commented on this too, when I had to dereference the controlling entity coming back after getting the high entity out of that player index for controller, right? So we get the low index out, and I think there was a couple things going on there. First of all, I don't think I called this the low index, which might have that could have confused things, because I know at one point I was writing in low index or high index when I should have been writing in low index or something like that. So there's a bunch of like little things that were messed up. So one thing that was messed up in here is that we returned this high entity pointer at the end of this, making an entity high frequency. That happens once we know we want to get the high entity out of a low entity. All right, it just kind of, if we don't have it already, then we want to implicitly make it an active entity at when we're making this call. And so we want to return a pointer back to that out of this. But I was actually, and again, this just probably has to do with me rushing along, I actually declared a whole new variable in here, and then I did all these assignments pulling stuff out of the low entity, and then I didn't actually return this here. And so that was a bug that I don't even think I ever quite saw, but I noticed it when I was trying to find the bug that was actually holding us back from completing that stream in the first place. And so I fixed that. But the real issue that was leading to that crash that I wasn't able to deduce in time goes back to this again. This was returning a pointer originally, right? So when I, let's go all the way back here. When I got this back, it was giving me a pointer, and then I was dereferencing it. And I also did something wrong down here where, because this was a pointer, I noticed that it was crashing here. And so I thought, oh, so we need to check if this is, whether this is nil. And that's not actually true. We still want to check if the high entity is nil, because that's actually, that has to do with all of the camera offset stuff that's going on in here and down in there when we set the camera to update it to reflect the player's new position as they move through the world. So I just kind of got led down the wrong path, but I could tell that there was something funky about that dereference that I was doing. And it really just came down to this. I think when originally we had this get low entity proc, and I copied it over and I left it as a pointer, but it needs to not be a pointer, because when I was doing that, I would come in here to assign basically all the stuff that gets bundled into this kind of top level entity struct, and I was dereferencing a nil pointer. So really silly, stupid bug, but it's happened maybe once or twice before to me on stream, and it's just another lesson, right, to pay attention, because I just, so much of the time I'm just trying to keep up with Casey, and just I was rushing. It's not what you want to do ideally, right? So hey Andrew, it's going good. I was just kind of explaining here the cause of the bug that I was seeing at the end of yesterday's stream, and it just happened to be a null pointer dereference, but now we are good. Well, we're not totally good. There's still something else that Casey has going on in his code, which is that when we start up, the walls actually do not they're not being brought into the high frequency. They're not being made active. They're still lying dormant because of the wrapping code, which he started talking about a little bit again. Where is that? I think it's in the set camera stuff. He started talking a little bit about that and made this change, right? Because what's happening when we do these operations is that it's wrapping over to the other side, right? To the other, basically to that high 4 billion number. And the reason why we don't want that is then the entity does not pass this check, which is why it won't be made high frequency, right? So if I uncomment this here, like so, and then build again, we won't see those walls come in, but we can still spawn our player in just fine. See, so, and the code that we're starting off today with, Casey's code is actually in that state, but I wanted to leave that in to kind of cement this for myself, that, I understand why those walls are not being brought into high frequency or being made active, however you want to think of it as. And so yeah, we're in a good state to start off today. It was just a bit of chasing down bugs that I don't know what to do about it in a situation like that. It's just on me to start the stream earlier in the day, find a way to do that and find time to do that, so I know I'm not having to rush and go do stuff later, because that's never a good feeling. So the first half hour or so of today's episode, Casey spends blackboarding, talking about basically creating a sparse tile storage, I think. No, hash-based world storage for all of the tile chunks. And, it's not a particularly, for me, it's not a super interesting technical topic, although I can appreciate why it's important. But basically, at the end of it, he goes and says, a lot of the time, somebody adds it to do in a code base to make a better, more perfect hashing function for storing and accessing things like I actually can't remember if it's the tiles or the entities. I assume it's going to be the tiles that we're going to be working on today, but it's all pretty closely related because the entities kind of get brought in on the tiles. And I think he was talking about putting them, somehow having the entities be stored off the chunk or something like that. I can't remember exactly, but obviously we'll see as we move forward here, but the point was that usually a rudimentary implementation goes a long way, and you know, rarely are forced to come back and make that hash function better, which is what this little blurb here is about to do, better hash function. But he also talks about, you know, the way you can do this, and he goes over two different approaches, I think, which are internal and external chaining, or linking, or probing. He uses all those different terms with the disclaimer that they aren't necessarily the right ones. Any one of them could be right. They could all be right, or they could all be wrong, because, you know, the vocabulary might not be the same as what it was when he learned it, you know, 20, 30 some odd years ago. But it makes enough intuitive sense to me that basically if we're linking externally, the idea is once we go to store something at a specific hash index or hash slot, I guess, if there's something already there and we have a collision, then we just create a linked list, or we store a linked list there so that when at that collision, we can then just throw that that store at the end of it, or however you want that linked list to work, I guess. And then the other way would be internal, which is when you get a collision, you just iterate through until you find an empty slot, right? And then the trade-offs are that you use the storage internally more effectively, because you might have certain collisions where there's like a really long linked list, and then others might be really short. But then you have performance trade-offs, because now you're having to search. The more filled the hash gets, the longer it takes to find an empty slot. So maybe I didn't articulate that as well as he did, but that's basically the gist of it after he does all this blackboarding. And I wanted to get through that just so we could jump back into the code and keep working on the game. So let's go ahead, and I just want to make sure that this is set up right. Yeah, I think we're good. Nothing's muted. In fact, I bet this is going to like buffer and refresh and all this stuff. So I'm just going to go ahead and
all the way down that rabbit.
Refresh it manually and pop that back out. And here we go.
But I wanted to make sure people understand that it's there. So all I really want to do is I just want to be able to start saying, okay, let's go to our handmade tile system here, right? And let's stop doing this tile chunk count stuff, and let's start doing it so that we're just storing them in a hash table essentially. So in our tile chunk, we're going to say what its tile chunk X, tile chunk Y, and tile chunk Z actually were, right? So essentially these, right? We're going to say the coordinates of the tile chunk. Put this back down here. And the coordinates. Why is that? My Emacs is very slow right now. What's going on? Do I have some weird? Who's?
Hold on. I'm worried that I made some kind of change here. I did not. Okay. Or if I did, I backed it off correctly. I don't want random changes sneaking in that I was adding just for demonstrative purposes, right? That'd be bad, because it could lead to some bug, surely.
Who's responsible for this? What's going on here? Nothing weird going on. Really? I don't know. Yeah. I wonder if Krita's being a little hoggy. I don't think so. I don't know what's going on, but I guess that's just the way it goes sometimes. All right. So we've got these tile chunks, right? And I'm just going to store with the tile chunk now which coordinate it was so that it can be in a hash table, right? And maybe for now we'll just use external chaining. So we'll just say that any time that we have a tile chunk that we need to sort of extend to have more tile chunks after it that map to the same coordinate in our hash table, we'll just have a next. So we'll say next in hash, just to be clear about what next means in this case, right? And then we can say, in this situation, when we're going to go store them, then we're actually going to call this our tile chunk hash, and we'll have our tile chunk hash can be of a known size. I'm going to use a power of 2 at the moment, so that it'll be not too bad to look up in, and I'll show you why we do that in a second. But it's worth noting that this is not necessarily the smartest thing to do, because it's a little hard to explain exactly why, but when we do the mapping, there's a number of theoretic reasons why you may not want to have a power of 2, because that powers of 2 directly truncate the bits that come out of the hash function, and I'll kind of show you why there's some issues there.
Looking at this here, and I don't know if he ripped this out and threw this into the tile chunk, or if this is just like a kind of an old bit of dead code that because I haven't seen these member names in a long time, and it could be because they're isolated somewhere in this 253 line file, but I doubt it. So if I search for tile chunk count X, okay, never mind. It looks like it is being used. Well, that's not right. Wait. Okay. Yeah, it's here in get tile chunk, but he just, it looks like he ripped those out of the tile map in favor of this right here, right? Maybe. I'm not sure, but I just want to make sure. And then I guess meters to pixels is not on this either anymore. And I think that makes sense because if we go in here, that is the wrong main file. We go into here, meters to pixels is just some local variable that we create here. So let's go back over here. We can safely get rid of that. And then one of these we don't need either. Tile side and pixels. This makes sense because if I remember right, he wanted the tile map to have no notion of like screen, you know, pixel specific stuff. It should all be relative to like the world units that we're dealing with, right? Okay, and then this, he's going to specify a size, and they're all going to be pointers. So we have a fixed width array of 4096 tile chunks, or tile chunk pointers, rather. And with that, I think we're good.
When we get to it in a little bit. But I'm going to do that right now just because I think that'll be a little more efficient at the moment, especially since we aren't going to be doing a particularly good hash function and aren't really thinking that stuff through. I don't think it's worth it. So what I want to do is say we've got this tile chunk hash, and the tile chunk hash will just be a bunch of pointers to tile chunks, right? So we'll have 4096 pointers off the tile chunks. That'll basically just store whether or not there's a tile chunk there. Now what I could do is have some notion of, I could just flat out store it like this. So we actually just have tile chunks there, or I could store them as pointers, and I think maybe it's better to just store the tile chunks exactly, because I don't want to have to chase a pointer right at the first lookup. So we'll just say that the first tile chunk is stored directly in the hash table entry, and then the slot, so very much like I drew it on the diagram, the slot is just is stored there. And the other thing that I could do is, instead of this being a pointer to tiles, again, we could actually make that as well be the 16 by 16. I don't know if we really want to do that yet, though. That's hard to say. Because the reason we were making that pointer be a pointer to tiles is because some of them weren't filled. And so what we could do is say that those are actually there. I don't know. Right, because this was something like this, right? But I don't think we want to do that yet. So let's just do it this way. Let's say that we have our tile chunk hash like so, and we've got our tile chunk. And so now we're basically just going to implement a very simple hash table that looks up inside the tile chunk hash, right? And in order to do that, I need to actually change the functions that look up in that tile chunk array, which the compiler will helpfully tell me about. So when we go to get a tile chunk and we're passing it an x, y, and a z, instead of this stuff now, we're never actually going to do these checks, right? Because we no longer have any bounds on where our tile chunks could be. They can be anywhere. What I'm going to do instead is create a hash index, and I'm going to do the stupidest possible thing at the moment that you could ever possibly do. I'm literally just pulling this completely out of nowhere. There's really nothing intelligent about it whatsoever. Literally, you know, don't do this at home. It's just stupid. I'm literally just going to create a function that just does some arbitrary, completely arbitrary mapping of these things together, right? So it's just flat out doing some kind of weird manipulation of the numbers, and it's basically just doing a standard array kind of thing where we're manipulating them and then smushing them together, right? And then I'm just going to take whatever that number is, and we'll actually call this a hash value, and then I'm going to make a hash slot, which is to say whatever random number this thing pulled out by smushing these guys together into one number, I now need to just put it into the table. And so the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to take the array count, however big my tile chunk hash was, right? However many slots I had. I'm just going to take that, and I'm going to subtract 1 from it because we know it's a power of 2, right? I'm just going to put this in here at the moment. This must be a power of 2, right? So what I want to do here is say, okay, take the array count for the tile chunk hash, subtract 1 from it, which will basically give me a mask that I can AND my hash value against, right? Because remember, if it's a power of 2, it means it's if it's a power of 2, it means that it's something that looks like this in binary, right? It's a 1 followed by a bunch of zeros if it's a power of 2. If I subtract 1 from it, it will borrow all the way across until there and then make a 0, which is exactly the mask I want to mask out the part of this value that would not fit in the array. So this basically just makes it into sort of a wrapping number, if you will, that fits inside the array size that we've defined. So that we know is the hash slot. that this thing would fit into. And I think I said I wanted to do it that way, right? I think I said I didn't want to store pointers, so we're going to do that. So the chunk that we actually want is just the child chunk hash now plus that hash slot. So now we've just indexed that that value, right? And we can assert here as well that the hash slot is less than that array count because we always want this truncation basically here should have made it so that it always will be. So after we compute the hash slot, we can get out the chunk. Oh, and I forgot the to do. This is the to do I said that every code base has in it, right? So that'll be in there, and we'll probably ship the game with it. That's just how it works. What can you say? But if we remember, someday we'll have to go back, study up on our hash tables, and do a better job. Okay. So we've got our child chunk now, and then what we need to do is say, is this chunk the chunk we wanted, right? So essentially,
I don't think that we really need to do this assert, right? I might have added it back in for another place because I was like looking for any sort of help with troubleshooting that bug, and I don't think it wound up having anything to do with this right here. So, you know, I think we're okay to leave that out. I want to see if I can find that. Was that in here? I think it was in the entity stuff. This is what we were looking at last. This right here. Right, because if we didn't have this assert, what's going to happen? Right, we're going to increase. We're going to have an entity index that is the length of that. What is it, an array or a slice? I think it's an array right now. So this fixed width array, it would be the length of that fixed width array plus 1, and then we'd go in here to try and assign, and it would give us a bounce check error, I think. So, and I think that was it. Yeah, I didn't see any other place where we're asserting, so I think we're good there. Go back to my tile business. There may be other places in the code base where I'm doing something like that, but I'll prune them as we come across them. I think I was just adding those in, even though I knew we had bounce checking, I was adding them in just, I don't know, for posterity, and also until I was sure that that was the case, that I didn't need them. Because it's easy to go and remove stuff that you look at it and you obviously can see that you don't need it. It's another thing to go back and add something that you know, didn't know for sure if you'd need at the time, but you're like trying, you won't be able to remember that, right? Unless you put in like a to-do. Whoops, that was supposed to happen. So anyway, what were we doing? We're going to take the address of that. That looks good, and that looks right. I think we're caught up.
What we have to do is make a for loop now, which goes over the chunks in order, like so on, and tries to find whichever chunk is the one that that is the values that we were looking for, right? Because we have to, again, we can't have collision, so we need to start comparing the value stored in the tile chunk to see whether it's the chunk that we wanted, right? This might actually have to be a while loop. Excuse me.
I don't think we're going to be able to do this without doing it the C-style for loop way, which is fine. Like, unless there's some obvious way that I'm not aware of. Hash slot. There's just some obvious way to get at the chunks next, right? In the linked list. And then I guess the condition is that this is not nil. And it should be a pointer. And this has to assign. Yeah, this is going to look quite a bit different than how I did it in Zig, because in Zig, right, like I had this as an optional, which I don't even know how I would do that with Odin. Maybe that works. OLS isn't yelling at me, so maybe it is that simple. But then, you know, and I can't remember if I was forced to do that. Some of it has to do with like providing default values though. Like if I just left a pointer to be undefined essentially as a default value in Zig, then when you try to, like, this tricked me up for a while before I realized what was actually going on, is that this just is like kind of declaring a pointer in C. It's just, it points to garbage at first until you do something with it, versus saying it's nil. But you can't assign a pointer to nil in Zig, I'm pretty sure, all willy-nilly like that. Like, you have to make it an optional, which would be like this, I think. Well, it would be using Zig syntax. I think it would be this. Right. And then you could have it default to null. And not only that, I think in Zig, it was a while loop as well. But it kind of worked the same way. I just had to unwrap that next in hash, right, to get at the next chunk. But that code always felt very wobbly to me. I never totally, because the unwrapping those optionals just kind of made the actual problem that I was dealing with that much more heady to wrap my that much harder for me to wrap my head around. It was not. I remember running into quite a few bugs that took a while for me to diagnose doing that in Zig. But anyway.
Excuse me. In fact, I think I will make it a while loop. Okay, so what we need to do is, we kind of know, in fact, that that's going to be that, so really it's a do a while loop at the end of the day. So what we need to do now is we need to say, okay, we have a certain tile chunk X, tile chunk Y that we were looking for. We're starting to look through our chain. Remember, we're trying to look through basically, this guy right here. We're going to look through and see which one of these guys has the chunk that we were looking for. So we want to look to see whether we get a match on all three of the coordinates exactly, right? So we look to see whether we've got an XY or a Z match, and a Z match. And if we have all three of them, then we know we found the tile chunk. So if we found all three, then we say, yes, good, that's exactly what we wanted. Although we need one more thing, which is we need to see whether the slot is filled at all, because it could be that the tile chunk XYZ are all 0, which I don't know if we want to, I guess we could also just say that all 0 is considered an invalid square, so you can never get down to 0, 0, 0. So we could do something like this, assert tile chunk X not equal to 0, kind of thing, or not.
So I think it's complaining here because I'm casting these to ints, and I think all of this is just U32s across the board, so that just works by changing that. Close off that if. Oh, that was weird. Why did that happen? I see. So it closing the if, and then so throwing the bracket in and closing the if made it indent with, the parameters to the conditional. That's kind of, and then backing it off puts it one behind where it's supposed to be. I don't know. Weird editor formatting stuff. It's one of those things where it's like, how long would it take me to figure out how to get it to format that correctly? And is it even possible? I'm sure it's possible. It's just, it's not worth the trouble. But that would explain why I'd come across random things like that where I'm like one indentation off. Maybe this is a good justification to switch over to tabs. I don't know. I've never really cared all that much about spaces versus tabs, but maybe it's something to think about.
Should say tile chunk X equals 0, and tile chunk Y equals 0, and tile chunk Z equals 0. So we could just say that 0, 0, since we're not allowing wrapping, basically the whole border of our world, the very outermost tile, all the way around, is not really allowed to be occupied. So 0, 0, 0 would be totally fine. We could also assert that we're never asking for one of those ones on the border. So in some sense, we could also say, assert that you never actually ask for a border tile. In fact, that might be a good idea, because if we're not allowing wrapping, you should never, ever, ever be doing that. So we kind of want to do something like this anyway. And we could even say, assert. Maybe I'll do it this way. We could say that there's a safe margin, right? And we could say, pound define safe margin, tile chunk safe margin. We could just say, never let the person get within, the world should never get within 16 of the border, right? If we start at the middle, there's no way you should ever get out there. So if something happens that's like that, that's just full on banana cakes and there was some heinous bug in the code. So let's just say that we have to be greater than the safe margin here, and then we have to be, less than the safe margin on the outside as well.
All right, I'll just drop in this constant here. Tile chunk safe margin. How do I do this? I think it's like this, and then whoa, let's not do that, and place all of these. And then these will be, what was it, like max 32 minus that? Pretty easy. This should actually be less than, oops. And I think we're good.
Right? On all the coordinates. And that seems pretty reasonable to me, right? That seems pretty good. So we start by going through, we grab the first chunk in the hash slot, right? And we then say, all right, let's go ahead and start looking through these guys. Oops. Compiled too good. Compiled too well. Start looking through these guys. Assuming that we don't find it, we need to go to the next one in the hash, right? And so what we need to do is say, well, first let's check, is there a next one in the hash? If there isn't a next one in the hash, then we're done, right, with the situation, certainly. Although I guess what I should do here is say when we do get tile chunk, we can also pass a bool to it which says create if doesn't exist or something, create if missing. And that will just assume to be false. But if someone wants to actually make the tile chunk, put it in place, we're at the right position in the code to do that. So I might just go ahead and say, all right, if, like so, I might just say if there isn't a next one in the hash and we didn't match, right? Then if create if missing is true, then I want to actually make one. So I want to make next in hash be equal to a new tile chunk, right? And so what that's going to have to do is that's going to have to, and in fact, you know what, I can even do it in a slightly more interesting way too. What I could do is if you pass the memory allocator to it, then it will do the creation, and if you don't, you don't. So I don't know if you remember this. If you basically pass the memory arena here, we'll just say if you pass a memory arena to it, then it will go ahead and create one for you, and if you don't, then it won't. So if there's an arena, then it will create a new one. So
okay, so this kind of complicates things a little bit because we get our allocator that we've set on the context, on Odin's context, is it's always present after we've set it. So no matter where we're calling it, any allocations that we do are going to happen with that arena. And so I wonder if I shouldn't think about it too hard and just say, like, do it the way, pretty much exactly the way Casey's doing it, but just pass the allocator off the context, right? That probably makes sense. And then, in places where we're not calling it or we're not passing the arena explicitly, then it'll be nil and the check will work the same. So maybe I don't need to think much harder. Think about it much harder than that. So we'd want to check if the arena is not nil and we don't have a next in hash, at which point we will go ahead and allocate that. And it'll be like new tile chunk probably. And we'd pass in the arena, right? Explicitly, just like that. I think that's right. It's just kind of weird because the arena will be present in the context, but it'll be like kind of like we're passing it in twice. It'll be passed in with the context and like as an explicit parameter. I don't know what to think about that. It just seems kind of strange to me, and I wonder if there's maybe a more elegant way to handle it that some of the Odin, more veteran Odin programmers would be able to educate me on, but we can leave in a to-do. That's probably the thing to do. So is there a more elegant solution using Odin's context? I don't know, but maybe maybe there is, maybe any other solution that we could come up with where we don't have to explicitly pass it in wouldn't be any better. I guess what I would want to do is whatever is more like an Odin convention, I guess. But I don't think this holds us up at all. We can just keep moving this way. And then, what is this assignment? Chunk equals chunk next in hash. I see. So that would make it nil. Right? If we get to the end. But if we get to a nil chunk and then we allocate it, we'll then say, okay, let's search again. Because at this point, we're going to store stuff in there, right? We're going to store the chunk there. Yeah. And then I guess he did just delete this code, but I was leaving it there in case it would come back for some reason. So we'll just wipe that out. Why not? I'll do it his way. And then over here is where we would say arena is mem.virtual. We're going to have to import that. Core mem. I think it's going to be in the virtual sub package, or however you want to think of it as. Still don't know what the right nomenclature is there. And this will be virtual arena. I think we can just leave it at that. And then I don't know that this new call is being done right. It probably isn't. Maybe it should be a pointer. Can I do that? Is that what he makes it? Yeah, he makes it a pointer. And it's going to default to, well, I mean, if we don't pass it in, will it just default to nil? Probably not. We probably have to set a default like that. Okay, so that's good now. What is this saying? I guess we don't have, yeah, it has to be an allocator. So we'd want to pass in the allocator, not the arena. And I guess all we need to do is just change the type of that parameter. Because we're not passing in that custom arena type that we worked on with Casey. We're going to do it the Odin way. And in that case, can I just make it a generic allocator? Like this? Will that just work? And I'd probably want to change it to be referred to as an allocator, perhaps. So we dereference it, and we did the nil check on it. So I don't see why this wouldn't be a good idea, but of course, when we go to run this, it may well blow up, and then we would just have to deal with that when the time comes. So I'm going to refer to it as an allocator, because that's what we're passing in here. Casey's going to do it his way, and I'm going to try and do it the Odin way, but I don't actually know if this is the Odin way, so it's kind of a fun little experiment that we're going to run. Okay.
So I may have to return a little bit more than that, but let's find out. So yeah. So what we would do here is we'd also have to clear it potentially if we always wanted to clear it, but we may want to not clear it sometimes, so we'll have to think about how we want to handle that exactly. But essentially what will happen here is this will do that fill, right? So in the case where we don't find one, we do our push here. So we would do 2 pushes essentially, right? One to push the array, right?
Okay, if we go back to set tile value, where is that? Because this is one of his overloaded set tile functions. And he passes in the map and the absolute tiles, so it's not that. Looks like it's this one. Yeah, that's all the same stuff. And then down here, Yeah, so we're calling make here. And so what's happening, right, is that make is just implicitly using the current context allocator, which is the same arena that we use to allocate everything everywhere else after we've done all that initial memory initialization. So that would just be, we'd just be making it explicit, and that seems fine to me. Like, I don't know if there's really any other way that you'd want to do this. It doesn't seem obvious to me at all. But maybe I'll get some feedback from a more hardcore Odin person than I, and they'll either give me the thumbs up or say, no, that's dumb. Do it this other way. So we're just going to take, I think, this here and drop that in, right? I want to make sure I don't leave anything else. There's this for loop here, which is right there. Everything just looks so much tidier in Odin. So when I look at the C code that Casey has, I'm like, am I missing something? Like, it feels like I'm just missing code. But the code, there's just brevity to Odin code that is really nice, and I try not to harp on about it too much because that's just, you know, that becomes the entire stream and that's all I'm talking about. But it just feels really good a lot of the time. Like, how can that be it? How can that be all the code we need to write? But it often is. So if I go down here, and so after we've allocated that new chunk, which will give us all of the tiles therein, right? Do we still need to go and make all those tiles? I guess I don't know. Or will they be given to us? Right? Well, he does still have that push array code in there, so it looks like we're going to have to. In which case we would want to do this again, right? Explicitly pass that in.
New chunk, like so. Tile chunk, new chunk equals push.
Okay, so that's what he does. This will be new chunk, and we create it like so, and then assign it at the end once we've done all the assignment. And I guess we don't need to check if the tiles are nil because by virtue of the fact that it's a new chunk, they will be. So we'll do it that way. That can be off the new chunk. So far so good. And then same thing right here. And that may be all there is to it.
Tile chunk. So we push a new one onto our arena. We push a new array for the tiles. We initialize the tiles, and we set the chain in our hash chain. We set that chain to point to the new chunk, and now we are done. We can just flat out break out of the thing.
Okay, because we still have that bigger loop up here where we're going and going and going until we find the chunk that we want. But if I put a break here, does that break the same way that his code would, and it gets us out of that outer loop? I guess I have no reason to believe it wouldn't. I'm just gonna do a double take here and make sure that I got this right. We still haven't done anything with this. I guess this is, so this would be in the case where we already have it. And we would say, well, so this actually, when we compile this, this might complain. For shadowing this chunk here, but that would be a bug if it didn't, because we'd be getting that nil chunk, but this would still be pointing at the first chunk. Like this would eventually turn around and become nil. Well, yeah. This is what Casey's code is doing, so it's probably not, I don't want to worry too much about what I would see as being an issue in the case where we did get to a nil chunk on this iteration, right? Because if we did, would that mean that we're out of space? I think that's what that means, right? If we actually completed this loop to the extent where we get a nil chunk back. Because when we do get a nil chunk, we want to break out because we want to make a new one. So I think that's what that means, but not totally sure.
And we're done, right? Same thing is true here. If we happen to find it, we have found the chunk, so that's fine, and everything's good. And we can also do this, so that when we break, we can just return chunk, and that's the chunk that we found. And that's pretty much it. You don't need that either. So hopefully you can see what happens here. Let's walk through it once.
Wow, it's that simple. Yeah, because if we found it, right, where that's the right chunk. That's the one that we wanted to get. So that's not bad at all. So let me just go through this. This is the part that I was most concerned about anyways, but then I got distracted by the condition of the loop. So I'll leave that to do in there, and I'll keep thinking about it and maybe look into it. But there's a million and one things that I want to look into, so I don't know if I'll have time. And that to-do just might sit there forever and ever, and a better solution might not actually exist. So we get a new chunk by allocating it explicitly with the allocator that we create using that virtual arena. I guess he did not split this out, but basically that's all that's going on there. I just kind of like saying, like, this is the number of tiles that we want to allocate. And actually his tile count, he does use a tile count variable, but he got rid of it. I don't see it here. And maybe it's wrong to assume that this is what that value is actually going to be. But then we go ahead and make that slice of tiles, and we go ahead and fill them all with like a floor value or a floor ID. And then we set the chunk that we're currently pointing at, that we're currently on, set its next one to be this new one that we made, and then we break out, because on this next iteration of the loop, wait, no. I missed this right here. Okay. I'm glad I bothered to go through that, because if I had missed this, then we'd be returning the chunk in the linked list before the new one that we just made, and that'd be bad.
I think this is mostly what we need. So we assert that we're not asking for a chunk that's in an illegal boundary, that we don't ever want to have something in, because our code is now not, we're saying by design it can never wrap, and so we want to make sure no one's near that apron, because then calculations that are based on regions will go outside it. Right? We don't want that. So we make sure that we're not in that region by checking to see whether we're greater than and less than basically the two boundaries on the low side and the high side, which is set to 16 right now, but we could set it higher. Hell, we could set it to 256 and just make a real big margin for safety. No one should, the world would be massive if you ever got out that far anyway. There's never, the player couldn't even walk that far in like weeks, right? So that's fine. If we go to our hash value computation, we just are doing something random and crappy right now that's just going to compute some number that mixes together all three to give us a place to look in our hash table. We then get rid of the bottom, of the top bits of that, and just use however many bits will actually fit into the array. That's the size that we made for our hash. We assert that that's a valid thing to look up. We then actually go and grab it out of the hash table, and we start walking. If we find a match by comparing the child chunks that we're looking for with the chunk that's in there, we go. Then we go and check to see if the person passes an arena for allocation, and there isn't another new chunk to check. I guess there's two things we should do there, actually, now that I think about it. Because there's a second case. The second case is if there's arena and not chunk hash, right? Or, tile chunk x equals 0, right? Which is to say that it was an uninitialized, if it's an uninitialized slot, right? Because that first slot would be uninitialized, right? Because we actually stored it directly in there. So in either case, if it doesn't have it, the next one, or this one is not it, and I guess that we really, this is a little ugly. This makes the code a little more complicated storing it directly in there, whereas if we just had a pointer, it wouldn't be. Because then you have to kind of go like, okay, well, which one actually is it? Do we need a new child chunk or not, right? So I guess the way we would actually do it, again, to make the code work properly, is if arena and child chunk count, right, equals 0. So if the slot was uninitialized, that first slot that's there, then what we do is we'd say, okay, if that's the case, then chunk equals push on the arena, and I'm just going to go ahead and say that tile chunk x equals 0, right? So we're going to push a new one on there, and then we're going to go ahead and set its x equal to 0. Yeah. that's not what I meant to do. That's not what I meant to do. I did it backwards. Sorry, this is a little complicated to talk through. I'm trying to make it so that these cases are relatively simple. This is what I meant to do. So if we have an arena, so we're supposed to make new tile chunks when we don't find them. If if there isn't another one next in the hash, then we need to make one that's next in the hash, right? So this is the case where we actually do new chunk, right? So I'll make a new chunk because we know that this chunk was occupied, right? So there we go. If this chunk was occupied, and it doesn't have another one in the chain, but we needed to make a new one, right? Then I will go ahead and make the new one. And in fact, I can just do it directly this way. I'll just say that the next in hash for this guy equals a new chunk, and his tile chunk x equals 0, so he's marked. Then now we have moved on to the next guy, right? So we can say chunk equals chunk next in hash, like so. And then I can do okay.
Okay, that got a bit unwieldy quickly. So we're counting for this issue right here where we've got, what do you say, an uninitialized chunk, is that right? If it does not equal 0, okay. I think I'm going to have to back that up and understand his rationale for it, but I'll just get caught up to where he is at this point, and then we'll just go from there. So we set the next in hash here instead of getting a new chunk, and then at this point, well, is that right?
On to the next guy.
Because now we're modifying the chunk that we're currently on, which feels weird to me. It's not immediately obvious to me why we want to do that. Maybe if I listen to him say it one more time, it'll click. Okay, and then he sets that right here, right? And then we don't have that yet. We don't have that. He hasn't updated that. This step is happening earlier. Okay, let's back this up here and see. What led him to this point?
Actually is. So in either case, not chunk hash, right? Or, tile chunk x equals 0. To the array, that's the size that we made for our hash. We assert that that's a valid thing to look up. We then actually go and grab it out of the hash table, and we start walking. If we find a match by comparing the child chunks that we're looking for with the chunk that's in there, we go. Then we go and check to see if the person passes an arena for allocation, and there isn't another new chunk to check. I guess there's two things we should do there, actually, now that I think about it. Because there's a second case. The second case is if there's arena and not chunk hash, right? Or, tile chunk x equals 0, right? Which is to say that it was an uninitialized, if it's an uninitialized slot, right? Because that first slot would be uninitialized, right? Because we actually stored it directly in there. So in either case, if it doesn't have the next one, or this one is not it, and I guess that we really...
Oh, okay, the base case, right? If we're starting off... Is that right? Is that what he just said?
X equals 0, right? Which is to say that it was an uninitialized, if it's an uninitialized slot, right? Because that first slot would be uninitialized, right? Because we...
Okay, before we start throwing things on to the end of the list, I think. Or next in the list, I guess. Okay, I think I intuitively can sense what's going on here now, but the specific details of what this looks like an ordered series of events, because we start out and we don't have anything allocated, right? And so not only are the next in hash nil, right, but the chunk itself at that first slot won't exist either, right? Something like that.
Actually stored it directly in there. So in either case, if it doesn't have it, the next one, or this one is not it. And I guess that we really, oh, this is a little ugly. This makes the code a little more complicated storing it directly in there, whereas if we just had a pointer, it wouldn't be. Because then you have to kind of go like, okay, well, which one actually is it? Do we need a new child chunk or not, right? So I guess the way we would actually do it,
okay, so that's, yeah, and he just pointed out that because because the first in the list is not a pointer, that means we have to go to this trouble because it won't just be nil up front. It'll just be zeroed out.
Again, to make the code work properly, is if arena and tile chunk count, right, equals 0. So if the slot was uninitialized, that first slot that's there, then what we do is we'd say, okay, if that's the case, then chunk equals push on the arena, and I'm just going to go ahead and say that tile chunk x equals 0, right? So we're going to push a new one on there, and then we're going to go ahead and set its x equal to 0. Yeah. Sorry, that's not what I meant to do. That's not what I meant to do. I did it backwards. Sorry, this is a little complicated to talk through. I'm trying to make it so that these cases are relatively simple. This is what I meant to do. So if we have an arena, so we're supposed to make new child chunks when we don't find them. If there isn't another one next in the hash, then we need to make one that's next in the hash, right? So this is the case where we actually do new chunk, right? So I'll make a new chunk because we know that this chunk was occupied, right? So there we go. If this chunk was occupied, and it doesn't have another one in the chain, but we needed to make a new one, right? Then I will go ahead and make the new one. And in fact, I can just do it directly this way. I'll just say that the next in hash for this guy equals a new chunk, and his tile chunk x equals 0. So he's marked. Then now we have moved on to the next guy, right? So we can say chunk equals chunk next in hash, like so. And then I can do, okay, if we're supposed to allocate, and we know that that the chunk tile chunk x equals 0. And again, we now know that this has to be valid now because there is no way we could have gotten past this case and have an arena if we didn't actually make a new one. So we look to see if it's equal to 0, which means either it was an empty slot to begin with, which meant that this case didn't execute. Oh, can't really do that there, can I? I have to actually do it here. Gosh, all right, this is way more complicated than doing it with just the pointers. Maybe it's just because I'm talking through it. Maybe it's not as complicated.
But also maybe, and I can't remember if he does, maybe he's just going to make it start off with a pointer, right? Going all the way back to this right here. Instead of this being starting out with just some uninitialized tile chunks, like it'll start off as a pointer too. You might be about to pull the trigger on that. I can't remember.
Okay, one more time. We check for the match. If we find the match, we're done. That's the easy case. We just return chunk and we're good. If the chunk slot was filled, so it is actually valid, which we're using chunk x 0 to tell us, right? If the chunk slot was filled and the next in hash is not filled, then that's a problem because that basically means they've given us an arena, so they want new chunks, and we're about to run off the end of the list. So what we do is we stick a new one onto the end of the list. We set its tile chunk x to be 0 so that we know that it's empty, and then we move to it. The next thing we do is we say, okay, if we were supposed to make some and we're on an empty slot, which we either were already or we just made an empty slot for ourselves, then it is time to allocate that chunk, right, like so, push our tiles on there. The tile count, we actually need, where is the tile count? What is the tile count? It's just this. There we go. So we don't actually need this case anymore at all.
And he did not change this after all. It's still just whatever that arbitrary chunk dim is, and I can't even remember where we set that. Is it just arbitrarily assigned somewhere in here? Oh, it's based off of the shift. That's right. And so right now, I think it may be, I can't remember what it is. I don't read shifting, but shifting this, what is it? Shifting this up or down by 1? What is, I can't go to definition of any of this stuff. I can do it here. A U32 shifted down. I don't know what it is, but it's just based off of that shift, right? Okay.
This just passes the arena. We're done. So we get the tile count. We allocate space for the tiles. We initialize the tiles all to 1 for now, and we'll put a to-do there that says, something like, do we want to always initialize? I don't know. We'll see. And there we go. So we actually initialize all of them, and now we've got our chunk, and we're done. So we break out. If none of those things happened, then we just go ahead and go to the next in hash as we normally would, and we continue probing. I think that's roughly correct, but that's pretty darn complicated. So yeah.
Let me make sure that I update that get tile chunk call, and I'm not sure which ones it is, because we made it a default parameter of nil, so the compiler's not going to tell us if we forget, right? But it looks like...
and we'll put a to-do there that says this just passes the arena. We're done.
It's just in there in the set tile value proc here. There may be other places where this is being called, but I genuinely don't remember it all. Is there only one get tile chunk? I can't remember. I know we have at least one procedure group, right? But I can't remember what it's for. Okay, it's not even get tile chunk. It's this get tile value business. Okay, so... And this may be the only place where we're even calling this in the entire code base, but I want to make sure. We're calling it in one other spot. Where is that other spot? Get tile chunk. So it's getting tile value from tiles, and then when we're setting a tile value. So probably not here, right? Because we only want to get a value that's already been set. But then again, if we want it to be on demand, would we just want it to default to that one value? I don't know. But it's only in here where he actually passes in the arena for now, so we'll just stick with that. And I think we want it to be a reference to it, right? Oh no. Oh no. Cannot take the pointer address of context.allocator. I did not foresee this, but I should have. I should have. I have no idea what to do about this. I would have to probably do some digging, right? Because that tells me right there that I'm not supposed to be doing it this way. I guess what I'm going to assume by default is that whatever is in Odin's context, we're not allowed to take the address of it. I think we could stuff like custom stuff. In here maybe, and then pull the arena out of it that way. Did Casey come up with this arena concept? Asked Joao Gabriel. Hopefully that's kind of how that's pronounced. No, I don't think so. I think arenas are just kind of a nice try. Yeah, well, at least I did try. I think arenas are just like an old term for describing like throwing stuff into memory. Like, and I couldn't tell you how far back it goes, but I assume, you know, I would say it's pretty reasonable to assume that he didn't come up with it. But then again, I guess I could be wrong about that. I would expect that the reason why, like, he doesn't elaborate on the term arena when he introduces that back in, I can't remember what day that was. It was within the first something days, right? In the first 20 to 30 days. And he doesn't elaborate on it as if it's a concept that only he uses or that he invented for himself to think about how to handle memory. He talks about it as if it's a well understood pattern that's, you know, been in programming circles for a long time. So I would suppose that it's not. And also, like, the Odin programming language and like the Go programming language, like a bunch of different programming languages have notions of what memory arenas are. Well, actually, I shouldn't say that about Go. I think Go had it in like a feature branch or something, but I don't think it's been introduced to the main branch. But I know other languages have it too. I'm sure C has notions of it, but it's colloquial enough that Odin has arenas available, right, in its core memory package, and so that's why I wound up using it, right, to allocate all of my game stuff, because it helped me learn about you know, how Odin treats memory and allocators and stuff with this context struct, right? And I naively assumed that I could get a pointer to the allocator that I had set in here when I initialized my buffer virtual arena, which was like the best estimation that I could kind of determine based on how Casey had implemented his arena, right? Because he had already allocated the memory, and that's exactly what a buffer arena seems meant to wrap, essentially, or use, you know, because we're providing that memory that we've already allocated back in the main program. So, and that all worked out, you know, without a hitch. That was all, and I haven't had any issues with going this way until now. But at this point, it's kind of put me in a bind, because now I can't just throw that arena at that procedure, because we've created an allocator from it and then assign that to the context, and now just every point on, right? Every point in the code from this point on, every allocation we're doing is using that allocator. But because we want to be able to say, you know, where was that? Because we want to, you know, on command essentially allocate or not allocate new tile chunks, this causes a hitch, because I can't just provide that by reference. So that's a bummer. My assumption that would just work backfired. And I'm trying to decide what to do about this. I think it might make sense to just move forward, because I think the rest of the code should well, so for a second I was thinking to myself, maybe I should just go forge ahead and we'll write the rest of the code the way that Casey writes it, and then come back around to this and try and come up with a solution that I can address on Monday. That would also give me the whole weekend to think about it, which at this point I may still do. But I think the thing to do here is kind of like what he was originally doing. So instead of just passing in the allocator by reference, we would just say that default param is just allocate, right? And we would say that we're not going to allocate by default, and then we don't even have to think about any of this, right? Maybe that's what he was originally going to do, or at least it looked like it, if I remember right. And we would say if we, you know, have the allocate flag set to true, essentially, right? And it's just a bool. It's not like a, you know, neat, and it doesn't make sense to like turn into an enum, right? Where it's like allocate, you know, true or false. Like that popped in my head for a second. I was like, no, brain, stop doing that. Don't get too clever. I think it just should just be true or false, and then honestly, that makes the conditionals look less ugly too, because now we're not checking for a nil pointer, and then we just don't have to think about this. Like we can just do these allocations and we're fine. And then when we make that get tile chunk call, over here, we just say true, right? Like the other way I was thinking about this is like allocate, right? If it was an enum, if we wanted to do it that way, but that just seems, that would make it explicit, right? Because otherwise you would have to use context to figure out, oh, what is true actually doing here? I never really like doing stuff like that, passing in a bool, because then, like, unless I remember the specific context why I want something to be true or false, then I have to go and just like, my brain has to do more work to figure out, oh, that means I do want to allocate here, right? And I guess the fact that you'd be pointing in an arena or an allocator or whatever here instead of a bool would make it obvious, oh, I'm going to do something with that allocator, right? That's the way that I'm thinking about this, and one reason that Casey might be using is justification to pass that arena in that way. So yeah, I think that's fine, although I have this error here and I don't know why. The variable declaration must be an identifier. This just isn't a declaration. We're just assigning that. Okay, that's fine. Okay, I think we're good. I do want to keep thinking about this because that's like an interesting deviation, right, from Casey's code. And I wonder if there's a way to do it where we would either pass in the allocator or do some other clever stuff with the context. I just haven't messed too much with context stuff in Odin. Like, I know there's another case where Carl has a video on, which is like using the temp allocator, which you saw probably briefly when we were looking at that type there. Or was that? That was in here. We were looking at the context type. Right, there's this temp allocator, which is basically like he uses it to allocate things that he knows he doesn't want to keep around past the end of the scope of a procedure. And I was kind of keeping that in my back pocket, if I'm understanding that right, for when, if for some reason we ever did want to do allocations after setting the arena here, setting the allocator on the context to use that arena allocator. Like if we were ever going to do something beyond that where we didn't want the thing that we're allocating to hang on beyond the scope of a procedure. But anyway, that was a lot of deliberation. I'm surely very behind. I mean, we did start kind of deep into the episode today, but it looks like you went a bit long, and I don't know if that's just because the Q&A goes long or what. Doesn't look like he's going to do too much more coding, so I think we are getting pretty close, but let me see what time it is. Okay. Looking good, actually. So I don't want to mispronounce your name. I'll just call you Gabriel. Sorry. Gabriel said, sorry, I was Googling the problem. Have you tried using context.allocator without the reference? Well, we need it to be a reference because we need to be able to say whether it's nil or not, right? Like it, because if we pass in nothing, then it'll default to nil, and we can't have the type be nillable if it's passed by value, if that makes sense. So we're gonna have to clean up this error here momentarily, but I'll just explain what I mean here real quick, and then we'll move on. If I was to make this an allocator, right, and I guess now we're not using mem, but I'll get rid of that import after we change this. Let's say we were going to pass it in by value and not by reference, right? And it was just a plain old mem, actually, was it virtual? Mem.allocator, actually. Get myself all turned around now. Right, instead of passing a pointer to it, we passed it by value. Well, first of all, I think that would make a copy of the allocator, which we don't want. Or maybe it wouldn't matter because it would still use the same arena underneath the hood. I actually don't know how that would work, to be fair, but we can't ask this thing that we passed in by value whether it's nil or not. That won't work. And there may be another way to do that comparison that doesn't involve nil, but I wouldn't know what it is. Right? Like we couldn't set this to be a default nil value is the problem. And we don't always want to allocate when we call this procedure, right? So I could be wrong about some aspect of that, but I think that's the gist of why we can't do that. But anyways, this will work. It'll get us across the finish line at least, and it'll just be homework for me to think about. Maybe there's a way to do it that's closer to the way Casey's doing it that still allows us to get the same results that we want in the end. So that is that. Let's move on here.
So we get the tile count, we allocate space for the tiles. We initialize the tiles all to 1 for now, and we'll put a to-do there that says, something like, do we want to always initialize? I don't know. We'll see. And there we go. So we actually initialize all of them, and now we've got our chunk, and we're done. So we break out. If none of those things happened, then we just go ahead and go to the next in hash, as we normally would, and we continue probing. I think that's roughly correct, but that's pretty darn complicated. So yeah. What did I do incorrectly here? I forget. We hardly ever have done much in the way of actually having to use our arena. I don't remember where we actually made that. Where is our push struct? That's what it is. Okay. There's chunk. So, and now we don't need to do this anymore at all. Essentially, all we have to do is initialize that tile map to 0. So what we do need to do.
Okay, so back where we're doing all of that initialization, right? I think this is just what he got rid of because we're going to do it all on the fly, right? Is basically what he just said. Tile side of meter sticks around, but all of this is gone. Just make sure I got that right. It sure looks like it, so we didn't have to worry about that error, it sounds like.
Is we need to do a clear where we basically say all of the things in that tile map struct in handmade tile .h at the beginning have to have their x's cleared, if that makes sense. So we could do something, like have an initialization procedure or something like that, which maybe would be a good idea here. So what I'll do is I will make a initialize tile map function that basically just takes that tile map and does that init in here. So that is something like this: void initialize tile map, like that. Takes the tile map to initialize. And the tile side in meters that you wanted for your tile map, and then it goes ahead and does this stuff. It'll initialize the chunk shift to whatever it wants to be. It'll initialize the tile side in meters, like so, and then it'll loop through all the tile chunks, like so. Tile chunk index, less than array count, tile chunk hash, so, tile chunk index, and then it will do tile chunk hash, tile chunk index. And again, the reason I'm doing this the first time through would always work because we're guaranteed all 0 memory. But that's not true if we wanted to do these in place, which we're going to make worlds multiple times throughout a game because the player may restart, that sort of stuff. So I just want to make sure we clear it. So tile chunk x equals 0. That's how we have been marking empty slots. And we also want to go ahead and I guess we don't really need to clear the next pointer. The 0 is sufficient because the 0 will tell it to fill right away. So what all we really need to do is go make sure that the next pointer is always equal to 0. So I'll go do that in a second. All right.
Get caught up with him real fast here. So this is just going to be, that parameter that we passed in, and then this is also going to take that 1.4 value. And down here, I'll go ahead and step through the whole list of tile chunks, or I guess the whole hash. We'll go up to the length of it, right? Like that. And then this is where we'll do that 0 initialization, but that should already... Do we need to do that? I'm going to do it for posterity, but I feel like I don't need to do this. Maybe I'll just comment this code out once we're done and see if it's true. Because everything in here, right? Everything in here should be 0 initialized to default because we're using Odin. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think so.
So I want to make sure I always clear that out, which is good. Tile map. And then this is just going to do initialize tile map with that 1.4 value. And if we go ahead and clean that out, and we'll go ahead and move this into the C file. So that'll be that, and that's good. And then up here, we just have to make sure that our initialization does something same. So what we want to do here is say that whenever we go to initialize one of these guys, so we want to actually make sure that we initialize all the values in that struct. So we want to do the tile chunk x equals tile chunk x, yz, so we store what the coordinates were of this guy. We want to make sure that the next in hash is set to nothing, so that we know there's nothing after it. And then I think we're good.
So I don't think we have to do that either, where he sets the next in hash to be nil. It should be by default. Let's go back in here. Right? This right here will not be initialized to garbage, right? Like when we make it up here, that pointer should be nil anyways. So I'm just going to comment that out for the time being. That one I'm more sure of, but I'm less sure of that, this right here. And then over here, we set all of these.
So that seems reasonable. Oops, tile map. So, and that actually I think does do what we wanted. I think, barring bugs. So I think we've managed to get ourselves into a position where we're storing things sparsely. So now what we have to do, and this assert fired, which it should fire because remember we haven't actually tried to move the world past the origin yet, so it's 0. So now what we have to do to start using it is actually start building the world from the center, right? And so to build the world from the center, what we need to do is start ourselves off at the actual center of the world.
Okay, so I think if all of that is right, then we should actually be good to go ahead and build here. Get rid of that import. We don't need it anymore. And looks like it's trying. It sure is trying. But we crash for the exact same reasons that Casey's does. And that's good. So that means we need to go back into main here. And then right over here, or actually over here, right, is where we'll finally make this change. Knock out this to do.
So let's go ahead and do that. We have our this waiting for full sparseness. That starts us off at the middle, right? uint32 max divided by 2. That'd be the middle of where we would be starting. And we then need to also use that for our camera because we want to...
Hold up. Hold up. I feel like I'm missing some stuff here. Where did tiles per width and height go? Oh, it's because I must have deleted them because they're not being used anymore. Yeah. Casey just starts manually using those values hard-coded in places like, down here. I think he just does it that way. So we don't need those. And then the RNG stuff, we handle that a bit differently. Like so. So it really is just get the world out of the game state. Get a single tile map allocated. Get that tile map out, initialize it, and then set this stuff. Okay.
And we then need to also use that for our camera, because we want to start the camera off at that location as well. So instead of starting it off at 0, 0, we should do that screen center X or whatever. I don't remember what we called those just then. Let's go find out. What were those called? Let's see. Screen X, screen Y. Of course, okay, so we actually need to save those. Screen base X and screen base Y. So we'll just go ahead and store those there. And screen base X there. Screen base Y. Okay. And so then these guys can just use that. Screen base X, screen base Y. And now we've got the beginnings of our hash system working. Aha, and Z also has to be the same.
I didn't catch that. He's got... So these values here, does he just duplicate? Oh, okay. So, yeah. Go back up to that base. Screen X and Y stuff, and then we just assign these to those. There's that. And now down here, now does he just set those straight across to, yeah, looks like it. These here. Is that right? Yeah, that's right. Right? Yeah, because when we instantiate these now, they're going to be in the middle of the world. Smack dab in the middle. Of course, that's a problem. How do I want to do this? I guess we can make these U32s because I think that's what that code wants. Yeah, so that's not mad anymore. And then over here, we'll just get those ints out. So everyone's happy. And then, like you said, we're going to do the same thing for the Z. Yep. Cool.
Screen base Y. And Z also has to be the same. So let's see here. What do we have for Z? On our abs tile Z should also be the same. So that will be screen base Z. Like so. And in here, we need to now do screen Z, or sorry, abs tile Z.
Hold on. These should be U32, not I32. In which case, I didn't even need to cast those, did I? Feel like I didn't. So that ought to give us a U32 back. Right? Is that true? Nobody looks mad. I think we're good.
Z, or sorry, abs tile Z. I don't know why we're going well. All right, abs tile Z. So if abs tile Z equals screen base Z, let's see here. Abs tile Z, abs tile Z, abs tile Z equals screen base Z, then it equals screen base Z plus 1, otherwise it equals screen base Z, right?
Gotta set that to be U32, I guess. And I think that would about do it. Yeah, he actually instantiates it at that value too, so we can just do that. Right? Looking good?
Let's see here. Abs tile z, abs tile z, abs tile z equals screen base z, then it equals screen base z plus 1, otherwise it equals screen base z. Right? Just gotta make that work out. There we go. And so now, unfortunately, we have to actually figure out if we have any bugs here, which we very well may. So first of all,
let's see if I get that same assertion tripping. Because if so, we're in good company. It looks like it. I recognize that line number. This thing has been the bane of my existence all week. So there you go. Maybe we finally get to fix this.
This should be showing our entities, and it's not. So the first bug we have to start to work with now is figuring out why our set camera call is not working. And I think we're just about out of time. So I'll briefly step through it just because I'm interested, but we'll have to pick this up on Monday. All right. So when we come through our set camera call, let's see what happens here when we're actually doing this stuff. We are stepping through our entities. These mins and maxes now look correct, right? So that's all good. And I guess new camera P abs tile Z. So there's our first problem. Our camera needs to be at screen base Z because our camera was previously all the way down at the bottom of the world, which is no good. So that's that.
Well, that helps. Helps when you set everything. Sorry, I was just playing with my windows and I got a little bit lost here. Okay, so go back over here, and when we're setting, where's the new camera stuff? So right here, this should just be set to that, and maybe that'll be it. Dunno. I see one yellow rectangle. That ain't right. Yeah, so something else is still messed up.
Try that again. Okay, so now we have one. I don't even have an idea of how we had that bug. That's going to be interesting to see what's happening there. I have absolutely no idea what's happening there. That's pretty funny. You know, I guess I don't know. How are we doing our screen base Z? Screen base Z. What are we actually doing here to compute these? I don't know. Screen X times tiles per width. Oh, duh. So this is not quite correct. So these are actually divided by a lot more than 2 because they're actually divided by our chunk size, right? So these are actually, there's actually the notion of the max number of chunks, right? So this is actually divided by 16 here. So we're going to want a better way of encapsulating that, right? Because the screen base, yeah, that would actually overflow the tile amount because we want however many tiles, things are for tiles to say where the center is. I think we should have a better way of doing that.
Dang. Yeah, that makes perfect sense in retrospect. So I like to just kind of see ahead of time like what the issue is, and then if the answer isn't obvious to me, I don't want to waste time wondering why, when all that wondering I'm going to be doing is completely in the wrong direction. But it was basically like this, right? Divide that by 16. Is that what he did? Yeah. Looks a bit different because he's got that macro, I guess, defined, which gives him this value that comes back. And then same thing over here. And then maybe, I still don't know really why that would give us one yellow rectangle, but shoot, I hope his doesn't work because it means that my understanding of what I'm doing here is wrong. Well, I guess, you know, I feel like this should be fine. I'm gonna go ahead and move this up. Like that. Is that better? I don't really know. I guess it's fine.
Tiles, things are for tiles to say where the center is. I think we should have a better way of doing that. Let's take a look. Yeah, so that's a good point. We should have a better way of doing that. But okay, so when we actually create dudes here, and we have our abs tile x, abs tile y, we're making that by figuring out how many tiles over we go. And so the same should be true of our tile z, but that it will be now, and so that's fine. That seems, although I guess for z, we don't actually have chunks in that form, so z actually does work this way. Z is actually still just divide by 2. But, okay, so now let's see where we're at. Let's go ahead and step into the thing that creates them. Again, I'll try to stop in a second and go back to questions, but it's frustrating to do something, and I want to go see what our bugs are in it. You know, it's that obsessive programming kind of thing where it's hard to just stop when you're just about to finish something. It's kind of difficult sometimes. So let's see what happens here. Abs tile x, abs tile y, abs tile z. So why is abs tile y so much different than abs tile z? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. What happened there? That's a bit odd, right? You would agree? Oh, it's because they're multiplied by... Oh, right. So we're actually not doing it by chunks even, though. We're not doing it by chunks at all. These screens are not in chunks. These screens are in our canonical...
Oh, yeah.
Are in this. So we actually want...
Whoops. I feel like it would have been a good opportunity for me to try and catch either of those, but it's also just not... Yeah, it's so obvious in retrospect. Dang it. Dang it. So this becomes tiles per width, and that becomes tiles per height. And I guess the notion that I have of this would be, like, I wouldn't need to have this notion at all if we didn't care about making the screen sizes in the game a fixed width and height, right? And it was just smooth scrolling all around. And that still didn't work. So we still have something else going on here.
That. Yeah. All right. That was weird. Now let's see. Yeah, so those should now be close to center, and they are. That's what I would have expected to see last time. So we come in here, we go to get our tile chunk. We should see some random hash value here, and the hash slot is something that maps in there, which it does. We go ahead and grab it. It should not be filled, and it isn't filled, so we go ahead and grab the tile count that's supposed to be there. We fill out where it is. We push into our array. We initialize everything. We set the chunk index. We break out, so now we've got the valid chunk. That chunk is the chunk we asked for, which is good. And then we set the tile value in that chunk. So that works exactly like I would have thought. When we go ahead and add our wall, that works just fine. So that seems correct as well. But for some reason, we don't actually ever see any there. And then when we come in here, we are finding that our tile map relative positions are wrong. So let's take a look at what's going on there. Is that just because we're wrapping around in terms of int32s? I guess would be the problem there. That's a little annoying, right? Because you can see that our offset has to be signed there, but the thing that we're doing is a little too much. So we could fix that by, again, reducing our range a little, but I'm not sure if I love that idea. But that would be fixed if we did this, right? Because that just means that our range is a little too wide, I think. Why is that? Let me see what happens if I just reduce this relatively drastically, right? So I do like something like this, right? I just want to see what happens if we're just having bugs at the overflow or not. Yeah, so it looks like there's bugs in terms of the overflow there. So let's take a look at it when we have it at a slightly more reasonable thing. Yeah, let's see if we do it this way. We'll see what it looks like when we debug it this way. So inside here, I step in and I'm adding these guys, right? And I add their entities and so on, and off we go. So now it looked like that was working properly. In fact, when I go do this a second time or a third time, we should see that it finds the tile chunk again, right? Which it does. So storing it in the tile chunk seems fine at the moment. So I think it's in our entity sort of situation that things are going wonky. So let's see what happens when we map something from low to high, since that seems to be our problem now. Let's see what happens there. So we want to do a make high entity. So the first problem was that none of the things passed our inclusion check, right? Because we should have made high entities just right off the bat for all of the walls, and that didn't happen. So let's see why that wasn't happening. I don't know if that's because our camera's in the wrong place or what. Let's take a look actually at what's going on with our camera. So this is our screen base x. So we're probably still setting the camera wrong, right? Yeah, so that's our screen base x. So that needs to be equal to tiles per width, and that needs to be tiles per height. So we just basically had the camera in the wrong place, right?
Okay, so we'll try that out. Although I don't know if he's going to back that off and still use the max U32 value. So I'll just leave that alone for now. And we'll say that these two should be times tiles per width and height. Back to that single yellow rectangle. And then you can see that he's mixing his use of those variables that he set with the hard-coded values here. But I don't... It actually brings up a good point. Did he change those at all? No, it's still 17 and 9. So I guess we'll see. There's still something going on here. Something fishy.
There we go. So there we go.
Oh, no.
And so then when I create my dude, I need to actually create the dude wherever the camera is.
Well, I guess if I change the I-32 stuff to deal with the overflow business he was talking about, change from U32 to I-16, maybe at that point we'll be good. Of course, now nobody will get mad at us. Yeah, these guys will get mad at us. So maybe the way to do this is to just... I went way too far. I guess we could leave that as it is, because either way we need to cast these to an int from an I-16. But down or we set up the camera, we'll just turn all of these into U32s. Please? Oh, thank goodness. Okay.
As well. So let's go ahead and see if what
that would have just been another terrible feeling where it's SpongeBob. Yeah, let's add him into the game. Why not? That would have been a terrible feeling. Get to the very end of the stream, everything's just been going right in the direction it needs to go, and then at the end I discover, oh, there's some bug I left somewhere that leaves us in this broken state, and Casey doesn't have that bug, and now I gotta go chase that down, but we're good so far.
Add player does. So add player, we need to fix that as well. So we want to add a player for now, since we don't have any other real idea about how we're going to add a player. We want to add a player wherever the camera is. So we'll say that entity low p equals whatever the camera p is. We'll just flat out put it wherever the camera is, like so. All right. So now we are properly sparse, and our query seems to be working, at least to some degree. So we're in better shape here. We're not out of the woods yet, but we're definitely in better shape, right? Okay.
This is because that is the low entity, right? Maybe I should change all of these entity references to low. I don't know. Moment of truth. Can we spawn in? Hold on. I'm going to back up and make sure I actually did that change. And saved it. Damn it. Oh, God. Well, I spoke too soon. We are in trouble. Because that is all Casey had to do to get his to work. And mine's not working. That place where he's making that change. Okay, actually, this is a bug that was left over from yesterday, I think. It just so happens that this is wrong, and all we needed to do here is set that, right? We'll see. Nope, still busted. Unbelievable. Where did we go wrong? You know what? This right here. This should not have been hanging around either, because that just overwrites this change. Okay, so... And I don't even know if we need to do this, right? I think I commented on that back when we wrote this originally. But I think we're good now. I just had to settle down, just look at what's going on here. No good reason why that should be happening, and it's because you left a bug in the code, dummy. And look at that. All that work, but now we allocate chunks on demand, I think. So I think I can just keep on going. Is that right? We can keep on going, but never actually going anywhere. Off to the ends of the earth. Off of the end of the mushroom forest, just to start right back, wind up right back where we started for all time. Sweet.
Now we're about 10 minutes over, but we still have time for about 20 minutes of Q&A. So let's go ahead and go to the Q&A. Please prefix your questions with Q:, so I can see them, and try to keep them to stuff that we did on today's stream or on previous streams while I eat my cookies.
I'll sit here for one question, and then I gotta go. We have to head out and go spend some time with the family, enjoy the weekend, all that great stuff. But really code-heavy week, but it feels good to wrap it up and have, you know, parity with what Casey is doing. It was this has probably been the most challenging week code-wise, just because it's been a lot of messing with stuff that is easy to break, and I did break it often, but I always found a way out of it, which feels good. Get to listen to him munch for a bit.
How do I do it? QA? Like that? I don't know how to do it. I think it's exclamation point QA. Why not center the world at 000 and use signed ints for the tile position? Yeah, I would like to do that. Unfortunately, I think we may... I can't remember if we baked in some stuff here that doesn't do that. I didn't want to do that right off the bat. I want to do that as a separate change, but I would like to do that as well, because the reason that would be nicer is just so the values are smaller so we can see them. But yeah. So what we're doing here is we take the tile side in meters and then we divide by the relative tile. So that just gives us, that should work, right? Because this just gives us an offset, and so we're moving, whatever we move the offset by could be signed or unsigned, and it shouldn't matter, right? So it seems like that would work. It seems like that would work. You want to try it? Because I would like to do that as well, just so the numbers are smaller and easier to spot identify. So let's try it. I mean, you know, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, right? So if we did that, we would just change all of these guys to int32s, right? Something like this.
So everywhere in here, right? Make it a i32. Make these i32s. And these, and those, right?
And then we'd have to kind of clean up everywhere that it was doing something that was a tile chunk X, tile chunk Y sort of situation. So the chunk dim and tile X. So let's just do all these with int32s, and that's fine. And recanonicalize coord would work like that.
So just a bunch of cleaning up compiler errors, I think. Where else are we using a U32? Change those. This These asserts would look a bit different. Is this right? Yeah. And then this is gonna want to return. Well, actually, I guess I don't know that the tile value needs to change. And I don't think that he changed that himself. That's weird. Why? Why can I not shift this by another in 32?
And abs tile x greater than or equal to, so these are all done this way.
Shift amount must be an unsigned integer. Okay. So maybe that just happens implicitly in C. I don't know. Kind of weird. And then, okay, so if we go back out to our set camera stuff, these can just be left alone like that. What is tile span X and Y? It can be whatever we want it to be. Nope. What is this? Tonight 32. Oh, because that's gonna be. Yeah, we'll keep that cast right here. So I'm not messing with stuff too much. Oh, and then I probably want to change these. That actually could have been a pretty nasty bug if I left those zeros in. I guess as soon as I would have seen that, otherwise I would have fixed it then too. So it doesn't matter. So that's good. That might be it. No, not quite. Go down here, and then this just doesn't need to happen like this, or does it have to be? I think I just had to change the cast. These are all going to be in 32s now. And then can I just get rid of that like that? Whoops. And then here, I'll just do that. Lost that comma. Wait, no, I lost a paren. No. What? Cannot assign. Oh, because this. No, those are I32s. What do these start out as? Are these just 64-bit size? I guess I should have just changed all those to I32 casts. So let's do that. Now what? What is this? Oh, set tile value also needs to. Oh, okay. So these just can all be like that. And then same thing with the shifting over here. Where is that? Down here. I feel like this is going to screw us over, because changing those shifts is going to change the output maybe, but I'm too dumb to know exactly what the difference is going to be. And these take a U32 now, or I32, right? I was really hoping that this change would not be so time-consuming, but what do you do? Rather get it out of the way. Guess we can do that way. And then over here, same thing. Now what? Oh, this needs to change as well. Casey's probably going to back all this off in like 10 seconds, and this was just all a waste of effort. Oh my gosh, the list is finally short. This should be, well, yeah, that should be like that, right? But then this is gonna need to be like the min. Like that. And then we'll need to zero out the origin of the world, but, oh no. Huh. I didn't expect that to work. We'll see what Casey does.
So in theory, let's see if that causes any immediate problems. No, it doesn't. So in theory, that would allow us to go ahead and do that. And now, so what we want to do too, I guess in our handmade tile here, our tile chunk safe margin, we basically want to stay away from the edge in any way that might cause us to wrap. So, oops. What we'd really be doing here is something like this, where this is like, you know, int 32 max divided by some kind of a safe number, right? That's the chunk size that we're using currently. So that would be one chunk away. And so what we maybe want to do is go a few more chunks than that away, something like this. I don't know. And just say that, okay, we'll keep it to within there. I don't know what the safe margin is. We'll have to think about that. Think about what the real safe margin is.
All right. So instead of doing this way, this just turns into, geez, come on now. That looks like that. You can hear that my son has woken up from his nap in a very bad mood, which means I need to spring into action here. Max I32 divided by 64, is that right? Yeah, and then if we just take the negative of that, that is at that same margin.
Okay, so in theory that's fine still, and that way we can now go back to here and set our screen x, screen y, right? Screen base x, screen base y to be 0, 0, and 0 again, and then everything should still work out just fine, hopefully. Yeah.
Well, we'll see if I can do the same thing. Screen base x, y, and z are now all 0. And we're good. Awesome. Hopefully that's that.
So yeah, so no, I did want to do that. I think that's a good idea, just really for legibility, right? So I just wasn't sure if we could do it. I didn't want to do it first. I wanted to get it working first with the uint, just in case there's any baked in there, but it looks like we're okay. So now, again, the reason I want to do that was just because now if we look at those numbers, they're just easier to quickly identify what they are. You know, like if I look at this guy when I first started and we're creating the world, before they were these huge numbers, and now they're like 0, 0, 0, which is a much easier thing to internalize. Second time through, they're like, you know, 1 zeros, right? And that's just easier to read, really. And so that'll be a little handier, I think. Is it
Cool. Well, looks like that's it. I definitely changed more than I needed to, right? But I think I like having more signed integers for whatever reason. I mean, there's no reason why, actually. Where was that? D abs tile Z. There's no reason why this should be signed, so maybe I'll switch that back. But if I do it, I'll do it off stream, and we'll carry that into next week. But pretty strong coding week overall. Pretty strong day for coding and pretty strong week. Maybe we'll start to segue into some more different technical topics next week. But we're getting there. I'm now like roughly, I'm just a few days away from being halfway to where I was with this project in Zig, which is cool. It was a daunting thing to consider starting over from scratch, right, with Odin, but I'm excited because, you know, these first 60-ish days just kind of flew right past me. So anyways, thanks for hanging out with me this week and during the stream. Thanks for the follow there, Gabriel, and anybody else. I've seen, you know, subscribers trickling in on the YouTube channel too, so thanks to those of you over there as well. And yeah, I'll look forward to seeing you again next week, where we'll kick off day 56 on Monday. So enjoy your weekend, and I'll see you then.